Welcome to the Affirming Village Podcast, where we center neurodivergent voices, affirm diverse ways of being, and empower families, educators, and advocates with knowledge that truly honors the whole learner. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff, a late diagnosed autistic ADHD mental health therapist and non-attorney special education advocate, and Lisa Baskin Wright, an ADHD and dyslexic educator and IEP coach. Together, we dig into conversations about neuroaffirming practices, special education, and disability rights. Please remember, nothing shared on this podcast is medical or legal advice, and the views shared here by the host and the guest are their personal opinions. This space is for educational purposes only, to help you feel informed, empowered, and never alone in the village.
Welcome back to the Neuroaffirming Podcast. I am Lisa Wright.
Hey everyone, I am Dr. Destiny Huff. Together, we're here to unpack what it really means to build neuroaffirming systems that support every learner.
In today's episode is one I'm really excited about. Self-advocacy starts early. We'll be talking about how we can nurture self-awareness, agency, and communication in neurodivergent learners long before transition planning or high school IEP meetings.
That's right, Lisa. Self-advocacy isn't something you wait to teach. It's something we model and encourage every day from preschool through adolescence. We'll dive into what it looks like at different stages, how to involve learners in their IEP process, and ways for parents and educators, administrators, and related service providers to create environments that honor learners' voices.
So grab your coffee or your tea, or if you're like me, your hot water. Take a deep breath, and let's jump into episode 9, Self-Advocacy Starts Early. I'm glad we have these scripts and both of us are adding and ad-libbing as we're trying to read them and not trip over our own words. Just a little behind the curtains look-see.
100%. Because it's like, because we're both very much like needing that structure. So we want everyone to know, like, this is what we're talking about. So you can make sure, like, was this the episode I was looking for or trying to access? But then at the same time, we are human and, this is supposed to be real life and how we really are. So we're going to ad lib and throw things in there.
I love it. All right. Well, self-advocacy is, I think, a really important topic, and my brain is literally like ping-ponging in a bazillion different directions of like where to start and where to go with this. But I think that one of the things I'll say from the jump, I feel like this is out of order, but I'm gonna say it anyway, is that self-advocacy in some ways almost feels like a buzzword similar to like neurodiversity affirming.
Yes.
And that people use it and like throw it out there like they know it's the quote unquote like right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And yet when it comes to actually supporting self-advocacy and our learners, we a little bit clutch pearls because maybe it's not polite or maybe, right? Like, and so I just think that there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, no, I think you started off really great because I think one of the biggest things I see as an advocate, and I know that you see this as well, is just that there is really this compliance-based perception of what self-advocacy is supposed to look like. And because of that, often self-advocacy from neurodivergent and disabled learners is invalidated at a young age. And then as they get older, then we're like, well, why aren't they self-advocating? And there's a lack of understanding that because it was invalidated and just a caveat for anyone working with neurodivergent individuals, and disabled individuals that are not neurodivergent, I'm sure this can apply as well, is that as neurodivergent individuals, we are pretty straight-laced, check a box, follow the rule, black or white. And so because of that, if we are repeatedly, and sometimes it doesn't take repeatedly, being told that our self-advocacy is not appropriate, quote unquote, and if you know me, you know I hate that word, then we will then refuse to do it, right? So it's not effective. It's not going to work. And we then generalize that to everyone, right? So the one teacher that didn't allow me to self-advocate, now I can't self-advocate in any setting with any teacher. And so that's the problem with invalidating self-advocacy at such a young age, is that it sticks with us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I see that. I see that happen a lot. And I think that for, I'm going to say humans who tend towards perfectionism and people pleasing and all of those things, that advocating for yourself and sort of taking up space and maybe going against the grain is already inherently really uncomfortable. And so if we're a little bit like talking out of both sides of our mouths, I'm thinking of like multiple people at the same time, like multiple learners I've supported at the same time, where that's their kind of basic temperament and tendency, is to want to please and comply and like sort of blend into the woodwork and not upset, ruffle feathers or upset the apple cart, so to speak. But they're encouraged enough, say by their parents, to take up some space, and you can advocate for yourself. And if you need a break or you need right? And they're met with more of an ableist pushback of like, even if it's as subtle as, well, can you wait 5 minutes? Or we're almost at recess, or, like, you can push through, good for you. And then like celebrating the push through instead of honoring that this young person just communicated they needed to press pause, that it will immediately shut down those efforts. I have several like learners that have like sprung into my brain at the same time of like, then it takes years to kind of unpack essentially that trauma, because it's so big for them to try to advocate for themselves in the first place. And then when they tried, they were shut down, even if the adult didn't realize that what they were doing was shutting this learner down. And then we can't get them to advocate at all. And they will say that everything is fine, or if they're given a scale of like 0 to 10, how you feeling, 10 being just fantastic, spectacular, the lowest they're ever going to communicate to you on that scale and feel safe about it is like an 8. But really an 8 is a 2. Right? Or whatever it may be. Like they'll push through, and it's a problem.
Yeah, 100%. And what I think about myself is that, being autistic and ADHD, and not really realizing till later, I think this is part of my autism. And, we always say it's a spectrum, you can't generalize this to everyone. But I've seen it in other autistic learners when I'm supporting my families, and they're talking about it in my own autistic child. But I very much, at a very early age, it would be a hard stop. So like if I ask for help, I can go back to distinct moments in my life where I asked for help. The response was that I couldn't get help at that time, or that they weren't going to help, or that they seemed, I felt judgment from asking for help. And definitively remember going, I will never ask you for help with that again. And I can look back at different stages and ages in my life in doing that. Right. And so I think one of the things that we don't recognize is, again, the way in which that can be generalized, and it can be generalized by topic. So I asked for help on a math worksheet. I didn't get the help. And so now I'll never ask for math help again. Or I asked Miss Destiny for help and she didn't help me. And I want to throw the caveat out there. Everything is built around perception. And so this doesn't mean that Miss Destiny is a horrible teacher, right? Like, this doesn't mean, for those of you in the classroom settings and the school settings, and even for parents, this doesn't mean you don't have things going on in that moment that are preventing you from doing it, from giving that support. So I want to be abundantly clear. That's not where these conversations are coming from. But it is asking you to take off that compliance-based lens, look through a neurodiversity affirming lens, and look at, okay, did I handle this well? Could I have handled it differently? Could I have supported in a different way? And so sometimes what I've noticed when I step into IEP meetings, and I know you can speak about this too, Lisa, in 504 meetings for my neurodivergent and disabled learners, is that sometimes the school team just hasn't had that perception. They're just not aware that, like, oh, I didn't even think that that could impact it. But sometimes they'll turn around and they'll go, but that makes sense, because then when I the next day asked them, did they need help? They were like, no, but it was very clear they were dysregulated and they needed a break or they needed support. But I can see how that day before, during that similar time, similar subject, I had denied that and they felt like then it wasn't going to be allowed.
Yeah, I have several thoughts. One of them is that, and we've talked about this before, that, most of the time, obviously, it's not all the time, but most of the time the intent isn't to harm, right? We're busy, we're trying to manage a classroom of however many learners, and there's lots of moving parts, and it's like, oh, honey, can you wait 5 minutes? We've got recess then. Can you hold it? Or, and you weren't trying to shut somebody down, but that was the impact of what happened, right? And so if somebody is able to sort of leave their ego at the door and be reflective enough in that moment to go, oh gosh, yeah, actually I can see that was sort of the inciting event and things have gone a little bit south since then, and how do I, right? That it brings up this idea of repair. How do we repair with our learners? This came up with a team a little bit ago. I can't remember if I shared it on this podcast or not. I'm not going to get into the detail just because I don't want to risk confidentiality, but there was a glitch with a young learner, and we had a meeting, and it was like that glitch was causing a lot of anxiety in terms of this learner being able to even access the building. And this learner does not have a history of school refusal or separation anxiety or any of those kinds of things. And because there was this blip, now school and their brain is a really scary place where their needs are not recognized, their boundaries are not honored, etc. And so, what do we do? And the school was trying more behavioral type interventions, right? And that was making it a whole heap worse. And so we had this meeting, and the family and the private therapist, who's fabulous, were able to talk about this idea of repair and basically say, we need that person. We know they weren't intending harm, but harm happened. And we need to discuss what repair is going to look like. And we need that person to essentially apologize. And thankfully, the school team was like, yeah, they need to. And so we discussed what that would look like so that it could be received by the learner and not feel too big, but then hopefully that would bring a little bit of resolution and move towards a path of starting to rebuild that trust. So that was one thought I had. The other thought I had is we're too focused, yes, compliance for sure, but we're too focused on like politeness, right? Because you'll have learners that'll like scream no or scream shut up, or right, they'll throw a punch, or right. And I'm really wanting to be careful about confidentiality, but I do know of a situation. I'm going to say this as carefully as I can so that it doesn't disclose the real story, so to speak, but where there was a situation with a young person setting a boundary and an adult not recognizing the boundary that was being set. And the adult kept pressing. And then the learner was like, it's a no. And so they said, they set their boundary more clearly. And everyone felt that the learner was out of line. And when I heard this story, I was like, we talk about self-advocacy. We want our kids to be able to notice what's working for them or not working for them and to be able to communicate that. Seems to me they were trying the best they could with the tools they had, and it was the adults that kept violating the boundary that the learner was clearly setting. And when the adult kept misreading the room, at some point the kid wasn't polite, air quotes, and now all of a sudden they're the bad guy. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And it was really funny because the person I was having the conversation with hadn't considered it that way. And of course, they fell out laughing because, of course, I was going to center the learner and stand up for the learner. But it was like, but the adult is the one that messed up.
Right.
And I feel like I told that story ambiguously enough that it's not
yeah, no.
But I 100%. Think that happens often, right? Like,
agreed.
That's a unique story. I can't tell you how many folks have come to me, whether it's via a consultation or, it'll come up in ongoing work where there's concerns about the learners being aggressive or they're being disrespectful or they're whatever. And it's like, well, tell me a little bit more about kind of what led up to the learner throwing a punch or telling somebody to F off or whatever may have happened. And it's like, do you want me to say out loud where the adult kind of misstepped? And I'm not trying to throw adults under the bus, but it's like, because we have that mindset, whether we're conscious of it or not, that like the adults are in charge and we don't want the tail wagging the dog.
Mm-hmm.
That if the tail sets a boundary in a way that the dog feels is disrespectful, like we don't honor that form of self-advocacy.
100%. I mean, and I think you and I both know that's what brought on this episode, was us really wanting to get into those layers and the different intricacies when you're talking about self-advocacy, because you're 100% correct. That respect piece is a lot of time why there actually is disrespect and dysregulation. Right. And where it comes from leaks back to compliance. And it comes from this place of you're the child, I'm the adult, you don't speak to me that way. And it doesn't honor the fact that children are people too. I'm telling you, I'm going to get a shirt with that on there because I say it so often. I find myself saying, it's like children are people too. And so do I want my kid to tell me to fuck off? No. And I will say, to my children's credit, they've never said that. And when I say a cuss word, they're like, "Mommy." But
you know what? I don't. Remarkably, I don't think either of my children have ever had. They probably have in their heads. My son probably
right.
My daughter, because my daughter would like not allow herself to say that
right.
to me, which I wish she would, because sometimes I so have it coming. I'm like, come on, sister, tell me. It's all good. But
and Lisa and I are laughing because Lisa and I have potty mouths. And so the fact that our children have not said that is astounding.
But good. I just don't think he's ever told me to fuck off. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't think he has. What a nice boy. And he's 22. I mean, we've made it a long time. I'm sure.
Well, I could almost, but I think our husbands come into play on that before I jump off this tangent, because I could see them, like, if our sons were to say that to us, they would 100% be like, "Oh no, that's a non-starter right there." So, and we, so I could totally see that not going well.
Probably not.
Yeah, I don't see that going well. No, like, I will see that a lot. And when it comes to that self-advocacy piece, and what I find is when we're in IEP meetings, right, and we're discussing just the struggles in the classroom and what's occurring. And, Lisa and I have both been through this. You read the IEP, the 504, read the notes, or read the evaluation. And from the interview or the observation, so it's not trying to, throw any specific role under the bus. We might see language of like being disrespectful and things like that. And so what I found too, though, is when you as the advocate or the parent of that learner, then, I'm very quick to say, okay, walk me through what happened. And sometimes I've noticed that's like an immediate trigger because they feel like you're about to attack how they responded, how they handled the situation, what they did. And I'm like, I'm genuinely trying to understand to see how do we prevent this? And part of that preventing, though, is recognizing where the adult needed to possibly adjust their response, their expectation, how they handled the situation, but also looking at where we needed to validate the learner or teach a skill.
Right.
And I
Totally.
think that often is where, like, where you see the disconnect, I feel, because I recently did a training for pre-K self-advocacy for Autism Little Learners Summit this year. And one of the things that I talk about is that because pre-K, because those early years are so much play,
Sure.
and because we feel like they're learning, right? They get away with a lot more things, but we're still not acknowledging that that's self-advocacy, right? Like we're just saying, oh, they're 3, they're 4, right? Then we get into kindergarten and now we're teaching them, quote unquote, how to be in school. And then it's like, okay, well, we're going to teach them that's not quote unquote appropriate, which I hate that term. And then it's like, okay, but fine, you don't want them to tell you to F off, cool, right? Like, I don't blame you. Like, if my child saw that to me, I'd be like, oh, touch pearls. At the same time, right? It's like, so what are they to do instead? And are you acknowledging that that was said in a form of self-advocacy, but now let's replace that with something different? And that's where I see the disconnect.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that because my brain was kind of going to like trying to put myself in the place of somebody listening to this podcast, especially like an educator or an administrator. That's like, well, what are we supposed to do?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What is the alternative? And because I don't think it's binary,
Right.
right? Like if the knee-jerk reaction to dysregulation or somebody setting, a boundary or placing a demand in a way that feels like a threat is to throw a punch or tell somebody to fuck off, like that's going to be problematic for that learner, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like we're just saying the adult should roll over and whatever, but I think that you're tapping into a piece that's really important, which is the validation
Mm-hmm.
feeling itself, the validation of like, I just asked you to do something that probably felt lousy. Let's try something different. Right. And I think that what can happen, I've been meeting recently, weekly with some of my former colleagues. It's been really quite lovely. And what 2 of them are still actively in the classroom, and there's been a situation that we've been kind of brainstorming about, et cetera, et cetera. And without getting into all the details, one of the things that has come up is how problematic it is when teachers take their learners' dysregulation or upset personally.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I think we know this as parents,
Mm-hmm.
that if we start to take it personally and then we get offended and then right and then our ego gets in the way, and I mean we're all human, we all blow this sometimes. I'm not trying to say that
Yeah,
I'm
it just
perfect by
fucking
any
happens.
stretch, right? Like things happen. But I think if we can be aware, like have some self-awareness of like, oh, I took that personally, right? How do I just press
Mm-hmm.
pause for a moment, take my own deep breath, get my brain body reconnected, and then proceed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I blew it, how do I repair in the moment, acknowledge the feeling, right? It was, I'm thinking of a situation, this was several years ago, where it was a non-speaking learner, and this sweet one had, never had quote unquote behaviors before, right? And all of a sudden they
Mm-hmm.
were biting, they were scratching, they were swatting, they were, and I'm thinking to myself, well, what changed in the environment? Like, what are we doing differently that
Right.
all
What
of a sudden,
happened?
right? Like, what happened? And so at some point, the speech path was giving their present levels, their input, whatever. Nice nice person. But as they were describing the sessions, this learner, and I didn't understand this as well then because it was several years ago, but I'm sure this young person was dyspraxic. And so the motor and like engagement was challenging for them, right? So they weren't able to point to the thing or do the thing reliably that this speech pathologist was wanting them to do. And so they kept taking their hand and basically doing hand over hand and violating their bodily autonomy to like touch the flashcard or touch the whatever. And this young person had bit and scratched and swatted this speech pathologist multiple times. And I thought to myself, well, no shit. If somebody was grabbing my body and manipulating it in ways I didn't consent to, I'd probably bite, swat, punch, right? Like, fair enough. And so I just remember sitting in the meeting thinking, how am I going to nicely raise this so that this, and the speech pathologist was younger, and seemed very sweet and earnest, but like clueless. How do I bring this up without making this person feel like total crap and like I'm attacking them? But also like you can't keep doing what you're doing. Right? This isn't a matter of we need to do an FBA and get to the root of like what, is functionally happening for the learner. What's functionally happening for the learner is you're violating their bodily autonomy and not asking for consent, and their attempts to get out of, like, to communicate to you that this is not working for them, you're treating as bad behavior. Like, we do an FBA on you. Like, we don't need to do it.
Oh my gosh, there's been many a times I wanted an FBA done on staff.
So I did manage to say, I'm curious, I'm wondering, and to the speech pathologist's credit, they were like, oh shit, like I hadn't thought about it that way, and let's try something a little bit different. And I think they did, and I think things ultimately like started to move in a more positive direction. But it was like, even though I was further behind than I am now on my learning curve, I knew enough to know that like maybe we shouldn't be manipulating this young person's body and making them do tasks that are incredibly fucking boring, by the way, also. And
I think what you're talking about though is like, for a lot of people listening to this podcast too, like they are coming here because something feels off about what they're doing, what they're seeing, how they're approaching it. Like I said, I apparently was already dabbling in neurodiversity affirming practices before I even stepped into it, because I just certain things, and before my diagnosis and before my son's, like certain things just felt off. Certain things was like, I know this is what we're taught, but I don't quite think that's like should be the approach, right? So I think that's what you're really speaking to. And just part of the self-advocacy piece, right, is just looking at what are they saying? So when we talk about, like, one of the things that we mentioned in the opening was like, what can this look like at different stages, right? And so in pre-K, like I always say, like, I call them the littles. The littles are very good at self-advocating, right? Like because they're learning, right? And so when you go back to, and I was telling this to someone the other day, when you go back to like all the Freudian crap of id, ego, and all that, right? Because all my education in psychology. But when you go back to that, some of that feels inherently truth to me, in that they say, like, when you're younger, what you want is in the forefront. And so I feel like society is what changes that, in my opinion. And so the younger learners are very much like, no, I want that. I don't want that. I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. They're very staunch in there. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, no. And you're like, but I will give you like everything you would like. And they're like, it's still a no because I don't want to bath. But they're not saying that.
Right.
They're
Right.
screaming, crying, kicking, running away.
It's so funny that you lift that up because that was not our experience with our daughter. And that was our
Oh.
biggest, our first, I would say, real tell in terms of how is she going to access education, is that she didn't
Hmm.
advocate for herself at all. She just froze in all
Interesting.
circumstances. Isn't that interesting?
So
And
she froze, but she also didn't comply with the request. So it was just frozen, and then like you were moving her along.
she would comply. Like, we're going back a long time. She's gonna be 20 this month. I'm
Yeah,
like,
Lisa's got
I
that's why
can't.
we have that parallel.
So
Lisa's
I am
got
going way, 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 way,
adults.
way back. But um, like I'm thinking of her in the preschool setting, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she's stinking cute. Oh my gosh. But like if her peers in the pre-K program, which were, like 3 to 5 year old children,
Mm-hmm.
kind of came up and took something she was using or like
Mm-hmm.
whatever, she, for the most part, just let them. But then she would
Oh.
complain. And what did she call it? There were 3 kids that didn't have names in her world. They were just the Steelers.
You know what though? That is, in my opinion, like that's the autism, right? Like she's like, this is what you've done. This is what you are now. Like that is your thing. My son's thing was liars. It's like
Oh
it was like,
yeah,
who did
she had some of
this?
that too. She
And
had
they
some of
said
that too.
maybe he did it. In his mind, he knew he didn't do it, so you're a liar. And we had to
Oh
teach
yeah.
him like that's not how it works. Like,
Right.
you know, they
No,
didn't do
yeah.
it. They don't mean to call you. They don't mean to say you did it.
Yeah, no, I remember there was a little girl in, I believe it was first grade, that I think it was just a regular day. I don't think it was like Halloween with like costumes and all that kind of thing, but must have been playing pretend and was saying they were a butterfly. And that girl was so pissed off. She's a liar. She is not a butterfly. She is a girl. Like, the fuck's the matter with her? But no, I mean, that was, she would just freeze, right? So, like, if she
Mm-hmm.
needed help with something, I mean, I'm really thinking about this more in the context of like needing help.
Right, 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 right.
She would just freeze. And then we
Mm,
were supposed to interpret the freeze. And
gotcha.
so to me, this kind of maybe leads into something that I think is really important as we sort of broad stroke, generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking, broad stroke this idea of self advocacy is there's all kinds of layers here to like, they need to quote unquote ask for a break or they have to quote unquote ask for help. Well, the first thing is you have to notice that you need it,
Right.
right? You have to be able to read that cue that
Mm-hmm.
like you're stuck or something's out of reach or right. And so sometimes when I did this a lot when I was in like kindergarten classrooms as a mentor for Gen Ed teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I've done this a lot with parents too, or at the IEP table where they'll be like, "Oh, they're a great little self advocate," and I'm like, "What does that look like?" Right? So, are they able to advocate for something concrete, like my shoes untied, like with a
Mm-hmm.
face, right? So it's something like
Mm-hmm.
tangible versus they need help navigating a social situation,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? They know how to ask for help when they don't know how to get started, but they don't know how, or they don't know how to ask for help once they've gotten started, but then they get stuck, or there's an embarrassment factor. I already asked for, I don't, right? Like there's so many layers of complexity here. But yeah, that for sure was our biggest, I guess, concern,
Mm-hmm.
is that all of those layers she didn't have yet.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it was mixed up in this perfectionism, people pleaser, like not being comfortable taking up space,
Mm-hmm.
temperament. But also, like, I think the brain body disconnect was
Mm-hmm.
at play. Not having the language, the discomfort of needing help was so dysregulating that, like,
Mm-hmm.
loss of access to language, right? Like all the things, like it's complicated. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that, in the context of an IEP, when we're like writing goals for self-advocacy, or like we're trying, right? Like it's like, how are we really thinking about the totality of this human being, kind of where they're at in terms of skills, but also like, what does self-advocacy look like for them? Is it completely absent? Is
Mm-hmm.
it like they're trying to, this is a horrible way of framing it, but it's like praying that like you'll read the Jedi signal, like Jedi mind trick, like, come tie my shoe. You see my shoe untied.
No, I mean, no, but like, one, you really pinpointed that, recognizing the need for help. I want to go back to that because no, that's 100%. And a lot of times we don't look at the multiple ways and the multiple settings, because I have very much stepped into IEP meetings where in the one-on-one OT related service room, this learner is very good at self-advocacy. And the OT is able to state, I believe that's because we are one-on-one, right? The speech therapist will say, well, I actually do small group with them for speech. And it's like 3 or 5 learners. And they are very good with self-advocacy there. And then the general education or special education teacher will say, they're not really self-advocating in my setting with the other 15, 20 students.
Right.
And so it's looking at settings, it's looking at services, it's looking at subjects, it's looking at time of day,
Totally.
it's looking at type of advocacy, right? One of the things that I get a lot with my middle and high schoolers that have anxiety or are overstimulated due to sensory needs not being met in this classroom settings is constantly requesting to go to the bathroom or constantly requesting to go to their safe, trusted person. And anytime we even suggest that, right, as an accommodation, and I'm not going to get on this train, but I'm going to like step a toe on it. It's immediately like, well, what if they overuse it? That's data. Like if they overuse it in your mind, and I'm doing air quotes if you're not watching it on YouTube, like that means that something in the setting is not allowing them to access it. And so their way of self-advocating is leaving that setting. And without, like Lisa says, without disclosing too much information, I had a high school learner. And every time it came to coming to this particular subject, this high school learner would go to her safe place and her safe staff. And the first it started, I was just like, they're never in class. And then the educator was able to go. She's like, I'm going to be honest with you. That is my largest class. She's like, it is very loud in there. I can see how that would be overstimulating.
Yeah.
And so then, because when we went a step further, if the learner understood the concepts that were being addressed, the educator was like, she very much was doing the work with her safe person in that safe space.
Right.
And she was like, but the struggle is when they're not accessing it and they don't understand because they're not getting that direct instruction. Then I'm seeing the disconnects when it comes to assignments and testing. But just opening that door and saying like, well, tell me about the environment. The educator was open to saying, you know what, that is my largest class. It is overstimulating. It does get loud in there. And the learner was like, nodding, and mom was like, that is what they have expressed to me. So that also is what, when we start looking at our older learners, what that self-advocacy can look like. And the other thing I wanted to note when we're talking about self-advocacy too is that it can shift depending on the learner's capacity.
Oh,
right?
God.
Like,
so important.
Like so capacity matters. Like if I normally, and that's what I always say, and again, we are not compliance based around here, but I always say like my son, my oldest, is the most compliant child you will ever meet. When he is not, when you are making a request and he's not following through, and I'm not talking about not self-advocating because we've gotten to a really good place with working with him on that. But I'm talking about like just like the self-advocacy basically comes out like, I ain't doing it. And it's like, that's because the capacity has decreased. And so instead of doing all the polite things that we talk about and using a break pass or a break card or saying I need a break or going over to the space that's been designated for a break, it just comes out as no and a head down. And that's because the capacity has waned.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I got like 8,000 thoughts all at the same time. And I don't know what path I want to go down. So the other day, last week, I was in an IEP meeting with a family that I freaking adore. And it's been a little bit of a bumpy path with the school and all the things. And they've got a really, really phenomenal private therapist who works with them who's also autistic. And literally like easily one of my favorite people. And I'm so sad we don't live in the same state because I really would put my name and my daughter's name in a hat and let them pull out, and whichever name came out would be who I would get to work with this amazing therapist. But they don't work here in California, so we're shit out of luck. It's really sad. Anyway, but the idea of grief came up during an IEP meeting. And this is a young person who is not dissimilar to my daughter, who's, really compliant and a people pleaser and all the things, and had some unfortunate experiences younger where they attempted some self-advocacy and were shut down by a gen ed teacher that is not so hotsy-totsy, because unfortunately those exist. And, some of the not asking for help is the fear, I guess I'll use that word, of having peers question, well, where were you? Right? Like, and this isn't just unique to this learner. I see this all the time, and it's very much so my daughter's experience as well, of the pressure of having anything that sort of draws attention to their difference feels really overwhelming. And what the program specialist was asking the private therapist was like, how are you supporting this kind of in private practice, basically? And like, what labels are you sort of using? What language are you using to help this young person sort of identify when they're feeling this way, kind of thing? And the therapist said, I get why you are using the word anxiety and why it looks like anxiety, and perhaps that's a component, but there's a real element of grief, that there's a knowing that they're different, that they're having a different experience, that they can't get their body to do certain things that their peers can do. And with that grief, comes some fear of not wanting to be seen and wanting that to be private, and right, like it's layered and layered and layered and layered. And I thought that was really, really important and something to consider, and it's tricky on Instagram because of course the reel went absolutely freaking viral in a way that I haven't had happen in a long time. Because I think for most people, it was like, wow, I hadn't thought of it in that way. And I really think that my child has experienced that. And then there were like autistic and disabled adults that were like, that's absolutely my experience. And, not in this gross, like, eugenics.
I need to be fixed bullshit.
Yeah, not that bullshit. To me, not considering grief as a piece of the human experience for neurodivergent and disabled people, because it's just part of the human experience, to me feels like a lack of presuming competence. Right? To me, it felt like a bit of dehumanization, right? Neurodivergent and disabled people are people. And I think as human beings, when we can't achieve something we'd like to be able to achieve, when we notice that somebody can do something differently than we can do something, when we want to really be able to do something and it's just not achievable or attainable for whatever reason, that there's some grief involved in that. Like if shit doesn't go the way you want it to go, like you grieve that. It's not just about like loss of a loved one, or right? Like grief takes a lot of different forms.
Oh yeah, as I've talked about that on the mental health side, I often would have to educate my mental health clients on like grief is not just loss of life, loss of a loved one. In mental health, in the mental health field, we talk about grief can be the loss of a friendship, the loss of a job, the loss of a house, property, belongings, the end of a marriage. Like grief, it just encompasses loss that hits you on this profound level. That's all that it encompasses. It does not have to be specifically someone passing away.
Exactly. Grief of losing the country you thought you lived in.
Oh my gosh.
Authoritarian state.
That part.
I could just open that Pandora's box and go diving into it. But in thinking about sort of how that potentially ties into self-advocacy, I don't have the right words, but a lot of times with like my middle and high school learners, like, and I'll even tie this into executive functioning, I will recommend some sort of accommodation where the learner has an opportunity to connect with a trusted adult early in the week, to sort of look ahead at what's coming down this week, whether that's you got an exam, you've got a paper due, a presentation, whatever it may be. With that trusted person, usually like a resource or special education teacher, sort of make a plan how to break things down, or I'm not going to be able to get all this done. So how do I then reach out to my general education teacher to ask for an extension or ask to be able to do something a little bit differently, right? And scaffolding that process. So perhaps it's that the trusted adult is typing the email, but the learner is present to dictate it or give a thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever that may look like. And over time, building up those executive functioning skills, but also building up those advocacy skills. Because without violating my daughter's privacy, this has been a lifelong challenge point. And now as a young adult in university, it's still very much so a challenge of like, how am I accessing the accommodations that have been provided to me by this university, but I now have to be the one to inform the adults and sort of navigate the systems in order to access those accommodations. And I think that one of the through threads, regardless of age, and we've touched on it, is that safety being cued and that relationship being there. And so what does advocacy look like in the absence of that sense of felt safety or that trusted relationship. Because if it's missing, the advocacy falters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think something that has to be understood is that advocacy, self-advocacy is a lifelong process. Um, Even at me and Lisa's big old age, we have talked about, we've had moments where we're just like pumping each other up to self-advocate for ourselves in settings and environments because it can be difficult or challenging, regardless of age. And I think a lot of times, and I made a post about this. I don't know if I already put it out or who knows with my social media. One of the things I noticed that we place responsibilities and expectations on learners with IEPs just because they have an IEP. What I mean by that is because we can write a goal on something we want them to do or in a compliance-based world often not do, even though it's something that their same age and grade peers do, we will put it in the IEP. And so I think another thing with self-advocacy is acknowledging like, yeah, the 15-year-old said this shit is stupid. Like his classmate also said this shit is stupid, but he doesn't have an IEP. So you're just like, we don't use that language and we keep it moving. This one, It's like a behavior note. We need to address this. We need to update a goal. And it's like, no, you don't though.
Right. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you said that. And I'm sorry, claiming in the background, my dog just jumped on the chair. I just had such a great IEP meeting the other day with a family that I've been with for a number of years. When we started, this learner was in elementary and now they're in middle school. And in elementary school, when this learner is dysregulated, they tend to shout out and sometimes what comes out the mouth maybe isn't the most appropriate thing in the world. Better for worse. And it really caused problems at the elementary school, right? They were all clutching pearls and, oh gosh, we can't do that, But I will say there were several gen ed teachers that were present, which was lovely because usually you get like one for 10 minutes and then they're like, sorry, we're out. And we had several for the entirety of the meeting. But at some point, the special education teacher was like, just because this learner is on an IEP, we need to be really cognizant that we're supporting them, but we're not calling them out differently from their peers who do not get IEP services and supports, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the general education teachers that were there were like, we know that this is like a stress response and, and it can be contagious, right? Both that learner sort of picking up on their peers, rambunctious, right? We're talking about a middle school class, large middle school class. And one of the teachers that was there, like the teacher you were referencing, it's the last period of the day. It's the largest class. They happen to be fairly rambunctious and loud and boisterous, And so it's like chicken egg, right? Is the learner just is the dynamic in the classroom triggering the learner, right? And very well could be, and the time of day and like all the things. But that piece of, yes, we're trying to support. Yes, we're trying to teach skills. Yes, we're trying to make sure that this young person is as regulated as they can be in this environment. Yes, we're going to try to adapt within the environment. And this is a middle school learner, and we don't need to be coming down with like such a heavy hammer differently than we would be their non-disabled peers. And I was really pleased that it was like stated in plain language with a unanimous yes, absolutely around the table with this team. It was really refreshing.
Oh yeah, because it can so easily be switched and be different. And I think, just going back to looking at how we were like, okay, looking at the different stages in self-advocacy and what that looks like and honoring that. And so I think from, as we head into wrapping it up, I think for self-advocacy, what I've seen, and then, Lisa, you can say what you've seen, what I've seen that has been, in my opinion, in a neuroaffirming way, is getting the point across, but in the educational setting is often deemed not okay, right? Is everything from obviously the physical side, right? So hitting, kicking, throwing, yelling, eloping. I've also seen the learner just shut down, so head down, and this is ranging from pre-K to high school. I've seen learners that hide under the desk. I have seen learners that avoid the setting in general. So maybe they have the inability to make it into the school setting, or they have the inability to make it into a specific classroom or lunchroom or recess. Again, going back to that overstimulation, I've seen where they've just refused to do the work. I've had middle school learners where the teacher is like, we are going through it. We're talking. I'm talking through it with them as a special educator, and they just refuse to do it, and not taking that extra step of why, when we can look back at evaluation results and grades and see that that is a struggle for them, and it's not one-on-one that this is happening where the refusal is occurring. It's group and exposure to peers and social dynamics and them not understanding and having to admit that in front of peers, right? So for me, when it's like, where have I seen self-advocacy? I've seen it in all those ways. And then I have seen where they're just like, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it. I need a break. I need a moment. I need the cozy corner. I need to go to the counselor's office. I need to go to my special education teacher. And those same ways, right, of which of just stating it blatantly have also not been accepted. So those are ways that I've seen from pre-K to high school. What about you, Lisa?
Yeah, no, I echo all of that. And one of the things that, and given time, we can't get super into the weeds about, but one of the things we haven't really touched on a whole lot is what self-advocacy looks like within the social context with peers and navigating social relationships. So that's one thing that, like, kind of going back to what I started to talk about a little bit earlier, and then of course my brain saw a squirrel and jumped a different direction. Of like, sometimes we'll see learners be able to advocate, air quotes, around like really specific, like concrete things, like, can you open my lunchbox, or can you tie my shoe, or I didn't hear you, can you repeat that? But the more nuanced gray area stuff is a little bit harder. The other thing that I just want to name is, in terms of the IEP, I will see goals written in for self-advocacy that include like protest or like that kind of thing. But really, like in the IEP meeting, defining what that looks like and sort of getting everyone's understanding up to snuff, I think is really important. And in terms of like from an accessibility standpoint, like, how are we giving non and minimally speaking humans access to like being able to protest, right? And so I'm not even going to open Pandora's box talking about goddamn pecs, but
no, I think you just brought to mind though, like, as we look at, future topics and ideas, like I definitely think looking at neuroaffirming communication as far as honoring all communication, and definitely an episode on being neuroaffirming when it comes to social situation supports and like recognizing what that looks like and how to support neurodivergent learners for sure.
Maybe that's a part 2 to this one, because I feel like it needs some attention.
I agree. So we're active in the moment.
Right. As we fly by the seat of our pants here.
So you just heard it, because I was thinking that too. There's just some things that we didn't necessarily dive into with self-advocacy. That this is going to be part one of us talking about self-advocacy, and we will be doing a part two, getting into the weeds of a few different things. And the reason for that is, one, because we fly by the seat of our pants. But for two, I think Lisa and I can both agree, as neurodivergent individuals and parents of neurodivergent learners, that self-advocacy and honoring that is one of the key pieces to creating that safe and supportive environment for learners to access. And one of the pieces that is continuously missing in creating an environment that neurodivergent and disabled individuals can access.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I still have so many thoughts. Yay, we're doing a part two. That's exciting.
All right. So again, this was part one of our episode on self-advocacy, and part two will be getting recorded right after this. So don't worry, you're not going to miss what we were thinking and trail off into squirrels, since we're both ADHD. So
like, yes, we need to record. Yes. This was the first episode we were recording today, us pulling the curtain back to show you. Yeah, we batch record, and we usually do 2 at a time. And this was the first one today. So
yes. So we are now going to head on to part two. Hope you guys enjoyed part one. Thank you again for joining us here in the Affirming Village. We're your co-hosts, Dr. Destiny Huff and Lisa Baskin Wright. And we hope today's conversation leaves you feeling seen, supported, and better equipped to advocate for yourself or your learner. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone else in the village. Until next time, keep advocating, keep affirming, and keep building the village we all deserve.